I am the one who walks silently through the ancient stone corridors of a palace long stripped of its glory, now flickering with nothing more than the weary glow of candlelight. I am the one who gazes into the brittle frescoes painted centuries ago. Women in velvet gowns, lovers frozen mid-whisper, courtyards bathed in dying light, and I hear the heartbeat of a story that refuses to be forgotten. It was night when the silence of a dying hearth crept into my skin. Summer reigned outside, but the chill of secrets wrapped around me tighter than the July wind. And within these weathered walls, I heard about them. The Renaissance black widows, poisoners who lured men into beds of velvet and silk, only to send them to the grave before dawn. This tale begins in a small but flourishing city nestled between the borders of feuding duchies. The streets buzzed with life. Silk traders haggled in the marketplace. Artisans etched dreams into tiles and tapestries, and courtiers whispered scandal beneath cathedral arches. But beneath the surface, where light failed to reach, something darker slithered, an intimacy entwined with death. She was the first. Her name was Ginevra, a widow cloaked in beauty and mystery. Her husband, a nobleman of some renown, had died of a sudden illness. A failing heart, they said. But hearts do not fail in perfect synchrony with whispered confessions and candlelit farewells. Ginevra lived in a manor surrounded by rose gardens and secrets. Her grace was unnatural, like a statue that had learned to move, to speak, to seduce. I sought her out. The rumors had grown louder, like wind through broken shutters. They called her La Vedova di Sang, the widow of blood. I was granted audience one evening, as the last light dipped beneath the marble domes. I found her on the terrace, speaking in hushed tones with a man whose face never turned toward me. The night was filled with music, lutes and vials weeping out of ballrooms, but Ginevra's voice pierced through it all. "What is it you seek, my dear?" she asked, her tone laced with amusement or warning. "A story," I replied. "The truth about the women who kiss before they kill. The ones who seduce not out of love, but vengeance, or something darker." Her eyes, as pale as ice over a winter lake, did not blink. She gestured to the chair beside her, and I sat. Thus began the first unraveling of a web that stretched farther than I ever imagined. She told me of a woman, a servant once banished from her house, who returned years later with jars of golden powder and pastes made from yellow fungi. This woman, Ginevra said, had served in a forgotten court where poison was art, where every tincture told a story. One night, the servant slipped into her master's bed not as a lover, but as a judge. I touched his chest, the servant whispered to Ginevra that night, and as I kissed him, I felt his breath catch, not from pleasure, but from the grip of death entering his lungs. His heart, she said, beat only once more after that final sigh. This, Ginevra insisted, was not murder. This was retribution. The servant had suffered in silence, humiliated and discarded. But with time, knowledge, and patience, she had returned, an alchemist of vengeance. I remember that moment. The wind carried a scent of something ancient, perhaps the roses below, or something less natural. Ginevra's voice softened. "You think it evil what she did?" she asked me. "I think it forgotten," I replied. And then she told me more, that the servant was not alone. There were others, women who had suffered the abuses of power, the betrayal of men who made vows they never kept. These women gathered in the shadows of palazzos and monasteries, traded recipes in whispered Latin, powder from Florence, a tincture from Naples, a venom smuggled in silk from the East. Each woman wore a mask of propriety. Each lived above suspicion. But their hands, delicate and perfumed, were steady with the vial, precise with the dose. They did not strike in rage. They struck in rhythm. First came the seduction, the wine, the night, the trust, then the dose, sometimes subtle, stretching over days, a slow retreat of breath and color. Other times immediate, a final gasp in the throes of what the man believed was pleasure. I listened as the stars bloomed above us. "They say poison is a woman's weapon," Ginevra said. "But I say it is a woman's voice, finally heard, when no one listened." That night, I realized that the story I sought was not a tale of monsters. It was a dirge of buried truth, of women rendered invisible by history until they made themselves unforgettable by death. In the following days, I began tracing the names Ginevra gave me. Hidden letters, cancelled weddings, mysterious deaths filed under fever or fright. Pattern emerged, and with it a chilling realization. They were not killing for greed. They were killing to reclaim power. But the game, I would learn, was far more dangerous than they knew. I continued my search not through books or records, but through shadows, the way a falcon might trace the scent of fear through still air. What Ginevra had told me was only the edge of the knife. Beneath her cryptic confession lay a truth more chilling, more organized. These women, these black widows, did not act alone. They were part of something older, deeper, and darker. A hidden circle known among whispers as La Congrega del Velo, the Velvet Circle. The name came from their ritual. Before each act, a member would wear a thin veil of black lace, stitched with invisible thread and soaked in a perfume made of lavender and bitter almond, the scent of cyanide. That veil, they said, was the moment between innocence and guilt, between seduction and death. My next step took me south, to a city famed for its gardens and guilds. There, in the servants' quarters of a disused villa, I found a woman called Livia di Murano. She had been a chambermaid in her youth, then vanished after the mysterious death of her master. A bishop, whose body was found contorted in his bed, lips swollen, hands clawed as if he had fought the very air. The death had been blamed on apoplexy, but the whisper in the kitchens was different. They said he died with the taste of roses on his tongue. I approached her as a pilgrim might approach a relic, with reverence and fear. "You want to know how we began?" she asked me, her fingers moving across a piece of embroidery she never looked at. "We began as ghosts." She explained that the Velvet Circle was formed in the shadows of convents and noble households, places where women were sent to obey, to be silent, to disappear. But these women, widows, maids, mistresses, daughters, found each other in their grief, and in their rage. One had been forced into a marriage with a man 30 years her elder. Another had watched her sister wither under the hands of a violent patron. A third, barely 15, had borne a child sired by a cardinal and buried the babe in a garden under moonlight. They met in secret, first to grieve, then to plan. They did not speak of revolution. They spoke of balance. They did not believe in chaos. They believed in symmetry. Each woman trained in herbs, venoms, powders. Not all killed. Some were messengers, couriers, or watchers, but all obeyed the rules. Rule 1. Do not kill without cause. Rule 2. Do not kill without beauty. Rule 3. Do not kill alone. There was ceremony. There was structure. Meetings were held beneath ruined churches, behind confessionals, or in bathhouses long abandoned to time. They had candles, codes, and incantations, not religious, but mnemonic. A single strand of black lace worn in public meant ready. A dried violet on a glove meant target confirmed. A smear of honey behind the ear meant tonight. Their craft became an art form. Some poisonings were slow and tragic, weeks of apparent illness ending in a sigh. Others were instantaneous. A single touch to a wineglass rim, a whisper in bed followed by silence. But always the intimacy remained. That was the power. These men died not in fear, but in longing, in the arms of the very women who sealed their fate. Livia showed me a small locket. Inside it, instead of a miniature painting or a curl of hair, was a folded list. Names, some crossed out, others still marked. "This," she said, "is not vengeance. This is justice performed with velvet hands." I should have stopped there, but something inside me, curiosity or perhaps complicity, drove me further. I asked the question that should not have been asked. "Have you ever failed?" For the first time, Livia looked up. Her eyes, gray and dry as ancient parchment, narrowed. "Yes," she whispered, "once. And because of that failure, everything changed. It was a nobleman named Cosimo di Caprea, a libertine, a collector of rare poisons himself. One of their sisters, a young noblewoman named Beatrice, was sent to him. She played the role beautifully, seduced him, won his favor. But Cosimo was suspicious. He had heard of women like her, and he had his own testers, servants who would taste every dish, sip every cup. The poison never reached him. Instead, he turned the game on its head. He kept Beatrice not as a guest, but a prisoner in silk. He played the role of the doting lover by day, but by night, he forced her to reveal everything. Names, locations, symbols. And in her desperation, she did. The betrayal cracked the circle like porcelain. Several women were seized and burned under the charge of witchcraft. Others vanished into the countryside. Some took their own lives before they could be questioned. And yet, the fire did not extinguish them. The surviving members, those who remained hidden, adapted. They became even more cautious, more precise. They no longer acted in clustered cities. They traveled. They wore new names, changed languages, mastered new poisons from distant lands, arsenic from Hungary, belladonna from the Low Countries, snake venoms from the colonies. The Velvet Circle did not die. It evolved. But they also began to fear something they never had before: each other. For the first time, they realized that betrayal could come not just from without, but from within. The death of Beatrice was not just the loss of a sister, it was the loss of innocence. Now every locket might hide a secret. Every glance might be a test. The code began to shift. Trust was no longer a gift. It was a weapon. Livia folded the locket shut and slipped it back into her dress. "We began as ghosts," she said again. "But now we are something worse. Something the world cannot kill. Because the world does not know we exist." That night, I left the villa with the weight of truth pressing against my ribs. These were no longer isolated poisoners. They were a hidden lineage, a dynasty of death, elegant and undetectable. But something darker stirred now within their ranks. Something dangerous. There were new names whispered in the shadows. Ambitious, reckless, and cruel. The old codes were breaking. The circle was shifting. And deep beneath it all, someone was hunting them. There is a silence that does not belong to nature. It is the silence that follows a revelation too great to bear. The silence that falls when trust turns to suspicion. I felt it press against me like a velvet noose as I returned north, into the lands where the circle had once thrived. But now that silence spoke of something else. Pursuit. It was in Florence where I first heard the name. Inquisitor Vittorio Bellanti. A man not born to the church, but to war. Once a soldier in the service of the Venetian Republic, Vittorio had been injured in the siege of Negroponte, an arrow piercing his left side, leaving him with a limp and a bitterness that never healed. When his sword arm failed him, he turned to theology. But even in priestly robes, he did not lose the predator's instincts. They called him Il Seguggio di Dio, God's bloodhound. He had a particular fascination with poisons. Not merely their use, but their philosophy. He saw in poison a form of heresy, a blasphemy of nature. To kill without visible wound, to seduce into silence. That was not just murder, it was sorcery. It was the devil's kiss. And so, when rumors of the Velvet Circle reached the ears of the church, it was Vittorio who was summoned. He began not with trials or fire, but with letters. He studied apothecaries, cross-referenced estates, followed sudden deaths previously marked as divine will. He read love letters. He bribed midwives. He intercepted shipments of saffron, wormwood, nightshade. He moved like fog never seen, always felt. But he was not alone. His greatest weapon was a woman named Sister Aldonza. A nun in name, but in truth, his mirror. Brilliant, calculating, born of the streets and trained in the silence of cloisters. She had once been marked for the circle herself, but turned away. Why, no one knows. Some said she saw too much. Others said she loved someone she was ordered to kill. Whatever the truth, she became their Judas. It was Aldonza who betrayed Livia di Murano. It was Aldonza who lured a circle courier into confession, only to slip poison into her communion wine. It was Aldonza who first drew the diagram, 12 names in a circle with one at the center marked only as Domina. I came across that same diagram months later, hidden in a carved wooden box in a dead apothecary's home. It had been branded into the lid with hot iron. The names had been scratched out, some violently, others with care. But at the center, still untouched, was a single word: Ginevra. She had lied to me. She was not a widow telling old tales. She was the head, the domina. I returned to her villa with the fire of betrayal in my veins. I expected to find her gone. Instead, I found her waiting, seated beneath a painting of Judith and Holofernes, her gloved hands resting on a letter sealed in black wax. "You've come to kill me?" she asked, not unkindly. "I've come to ask why," I said. She smiled, but it was a weary thing. "Because power never comes freely to women. We must take it where it lies, in darkness, in silk, in the tremble of a man's last breath." She explained that the circle had not begun as a coven of murderers. It had begun as a refuge, a sanctuary. The killing had come later, first in defense, then in retaliation, then as ritual. "It is the fire," she said, "that begins as warmth and ends in ruin." She handed me the letter. Inside was the final confession of Beatrice, the girl who had betrayed them. But the letter revealed a truth no one had known. Beatrice had not betrayed them willingly. She had been drugged, tortured, her words twisted, and when she realized what she had done, she had begged for death. It was Aldonza who had granted it. She had posed as a fellow prisoner, slipped poison into her lips with a kiss. It had been mercy, she said, but it had also been the beginning of her campaign. For Aldonza had not stopped with Beatrice. She was using the Inquisition not merely to destroy the circle, but to replace it. Ginevra's voice dropped to a whisper. "She wants to become us, not to end us." In that moment I saw the truth. The war was no longer between men and women. It was between sisters, between ideologies, between those who killed for justice and those who killed for control. The velvet circle was fracturing. Some remained loyal to Ginevra. Others turned to Aldonza, seduced by her vision of a new order. Colder, swifter, free of sentiment. But the fire was spreading. One by one, names on the list were being crossed out. One by one, women were vanishing, not in disgrace, but in silence. Even Ginevra began to fear the shadows she had once commanded. Her eyes lost their defiance. She spoke of death not as a tool, but as an echo drawing closer. She asked me if I would carry her story forward. I did not answer. That night, I dreamed of a masked ball, where every guest wore a veil, and every toast was a test. When I awoke, Ginevra was gone. Only the black wax seal remained. The circle was no more. In its place, something new was rising, sharper, crueler, invisible. Aldonza's circle. And at its heart, the promise of a poison so perfect, so undetectable, it would change the balance of power in all of Europe. Forever. The rains had come to Florence in early autumn, washing blood and ink from the cobblestones. The city's nobles spoke of politics, trade, and war. But below their silken discourse ran a deeper current. Whispers of disappearances, of women no longer seen at court, of sudden deaths wrapped in velvet quiet. The Inquisition had gone silent. No more trials, no more burnings. But I knew the truth. It was not because the poisoners were gone. It was because Aldonza no longer needed to hide. She had succeeded. Ginevra's circle had fallen, not in fire, but in silence. Those who remained loyal had either fled or been absorbed. The old codes were gone, replaced by contracts and coin. No more rules of beauty. No more limits of cause. The killing no longer wore perfume or poetry. Came with documents, stamps, promises. A new world of death. One no longer bound by revenge or ritual, but efficiency. And Aldonza? She had become its architect. But there was one final story yet untold. One final thread still pulling. The name had surfaced once in an intercepted letter. Hidden in cipher, traced in lemon juice, meant only for Aldonza's eyes. The toxin without name, complete. She must never speak. The letter referred to a woman. Isabetta, once a healer, now a fugitive. She had vanished from the archives of Milan after the sudden deaths of 3 magistrates and a bishop. Ginevra had once hinted at her, calling her the flame we buried. She had developed something irreversible. Poison that left no trace. No convulsions. No swelling. No color. It mimicked sleep. The victim died in the arms of their lover, eyes open, mouth still curved in trust. And now Aldonza wanted it. Not to destroy the world, but to own it. I found Isabetta in the hills outside Siena, living in a ruined monastery, her fingers stained with ink and wine. Her hair had grayed, her posture slouched, but her eyes still burned with the sharpness of a surgeon. I made it, she admitted, but I never used it. Not once. Why? Because it was too perfect, she whispered. It didn't just kill. It erased. It left no trace for justice. Not even memory. It made death beautiful again. That frightened me. She handed me a small vial. The liquid inside was clear, like morning dew. She did not tell me its name. There was none. Give it to her, Isabetta said. Let her taste what she wanted. And so I went south again, to Rome. Aldonza had established herself in the highest echelons of papal diplomacy, beneath a new name, Contessa Serena della Corte. Her face was revered, her hands kissed by diplomats, her words sought like scripture. But I saw the woman beneath the lace, a killer who had traded robes for robes, thorns for thrones. She received me in a hall of mirrors. Ah, she said, the chronicler returns. Come to write the final verse? No, I answered, to offer you a gift. She saw the vial and smiled. Isabetta's final work, she said. You brought it. You've chosen your side. I placed the vial in her palm. She lifted it to the light. I watched her admire it the way a collector might admire a lost sculpture. She poured a drop into her wine and drank. She said nothing at first, just smiled, then raised her glass. To the future, she whispered. Then her face changed, not in pain, but in confusion. She tried to speak, tried to move. Her hand froze mid-air. Her smile remained. And then, stillness. Aldonza died not with violence, but with elegance, just as she had wished for so many others. But the vial I had given her was not the true poison. It was a replica, a sleeping draught mixed with belladonna oil, enough to silence her for hours, enough to bring her back under chains. Because Isabetta had been right. Some poisons are too perfect. Instead, I gave the real vial to someone else. Ginevra. Yes, she lived. She had returned not to lead, but to bury. She had watched the world her hands built collapse under the weight of ambition. And she had made a vow not to resurrect the circle, but to end the line completely. To erase what they had become. The final poison now lay with her. Its recipe never written. Its origin forgotten. Its legacy broken. She vanished again soon after. Some say she died in the hills. Others say she entered a convent where she tended roses and said nothing of her past. I do not know. I have not searched. Some stories are not meant to be found. And I have written all this not to glorify the Black Widows, but to remind you they existed. That power taken by silk and poison may look beautiful, but it ends in ash. Let this be the final breath of their tale. Let the rest rot beneath the velvet. Let the world never forget that once women kissed men to death, and were kissed by history in return.